During the time that you were on active service, those couple years there, how did you stay in touch with your family?
By mail. My folks did not have a phone back then.
Okay.
Nobody had phones much. They lived in the country.
What did folks do to entertain themselves?
Went to a movie on base.
Mm-hmm.
Just 25 cents to get into the movie. And then one time, we didn't do anything really for that. One time, Stan Kenton's band, which people don't know Stan Kenton now, a lot of people don't, but that was a big band then. They came to the base and we went to the dance and had a good time. I remember that was one experience. And but we didn't do a lot. It was pretty strict back then because you were in war.
Did you ever get a chance to go on leave?
Came home, yes, 30-day leave. After basic training, I didn't get to come home, so I came home at Christmas of '51 and on 30-day leave on a train.
What did you think of the officers that you served with or your fellow airmen in the branch that you had selected?
They were, I could name them, but they were just like fathers to me. And they respected me. You know, I was the only girl in with all those guys, and they really respected me and called me little old you all, because I was from the South and they wasn't. And I taught them about banana sandwiches. They had never heard of that. So anyway, they were just like brothers and daddies to me. And then when we were fixing to get married, my husband and I went to Captain Cat and I said, I really don't know him. He says, honey, I've lived with my wife 21 years and I still don't know her. So that did it. We got married in the base chapel.
How were you able to stay in touch with your family outside of the Marine Corps?
I could call them once or twice a week. We were allowed to do that, and I also wrote letters. I wrote a lot of letters, you know, to my parents and to my sisters, and that's really basically the only outlet I had. We had telephones, we didn't have emails or anything like that back in 1961.
Do you remember what the food was like in the military?
Yes, actually I've never had a problem with the food in the military. There for a while when I first went to boot camp, they considered me overweight, so they put me on cottage cheese and all that not so good stuff, but my weight got all the way down to 118, and that's probably the smallest I ever was, you know. So they kind of regulate the food if they think you need to lose weight. But once I lost that weight, then there was no telling me what I had to eat and what I couldn't eat.
Do you remember having plenty of other supplies that you needed? Or?
Oh yeah, you could go to the PX or anything if you needed something, and a lot of it was paid for by the Marine Corps. But some of them, like I always wanted a pair of dress blues, but the only women who got dress blues were given those dress blues if they had an assignment in like an embassy or DC where they had to be out in front of the public a lot. And so I never did get dress blues.
Was there anything special that you would do just to entertain yourself or for good luck or
Besides the choir, I really enjoyed singing in the choir, and then we could go swimming. But I was down there in January, February, and March, so swimming was kind of out of the question at that time. I believe some of us went bowling. And when I got stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, I would go, there was a roller skating rink not too far. We'd go roller skating, and at 10 o'clock they shut the roller skating down and we'd dance. So I thought that was nice. But as far as, and I think once or twice we'd go to a movie, but that's all.
Where did you travel, or did you get to travel much while you were in the service?
I didn't get to travel as much as I had hoped. When I left Delaware, I had to go to Pennsylvania. We flew out of Pennsylvania to a little town called Yamasee, South Carolina. And then they bused us to Parris Island. And then, of course, I stayed on Parris Island for those 3 months. And then when I got stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, I went home to Delaware first and then back to Norfolk. But I was never assigned another duty station.
Do you recall any particularly humorous events or unusual events?
Yes, I had a friend who, it wasn't humorous then, but it's humorous now because she had been out having a good time, and when she came in, she was supposed to relieve me at 11 o'clock p.m., but she was in no condition to relieve me, so I went and stayed up all night and did her assignment too, and she's always been eternally grateful to me for that. We joked about it, and I kid her about it that she owed me 8 hours.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Mainly it was through the old-time way of letter writing. That was something that they encouraged us from day one, is you write letters home every single day. And of course, it was always exciting when we would get letters from home from our families because we didn't get to have that face-to-face or over the telephone contact with them. And so I did my best to write, all my family members and, just keep up with them and tell them how I was feeling or if I was having a bad day or whatever. And one letter in particular that stands out to me was from my dad, who also served in the Army. And I was really discouraged, and I'd had an injury, so that can, bring you down too. And he told me, and to this day, it sticks with me, and that's quitters never win and winners never quit. So that was always my focus for the goal that I was there for, and that was to complete something that I started.
Did you feel pressure or stress during your service?
I did, occasionally, and one thing that they always kind of said is you don't let the drill sergeant see you cry. He's trying to make you tough, and you don't want to show a weak moment. So that was my outlet. If I felt like, I needed to get it out of my system, then I would go in the latrine and have myself a little cry and come back out like it never happened. So.
How did people entertain themselves on base?
A lot of times we just get together and sometimes just share stuff about our families, and talk about, things we've done maybe at home and things we'd like to do when we get back home, kind of a thing. When we were at, actual duty, sometimes our weekends or our Friday evenings would allow us to get off base and, venture out and go shopping, and just, sightsee and things like that.
Were there any entertainers that you got to see while you were?
Yes, there were several, but the one that sticks out at the moment in my mind was one of the USO tours that brought Loretta Lynn to Korea while we were there.
Where did you travel while you were in the service other than Korea?
Well, while I was in Korea, I took a tour to a place called Suwon City. It was a major site during the Korean War. And one thing I remember was there being like these rock walls with these square holes in the walls. And so the tour guide told us that was where they put the guns and the cannons through, during the war to protect the soldiers. And then I got to do a couple of trips to Seoul and do a little bit of sightseeing. It could be a little scary at times because over there was still a lot of rioting and stuff in the streets. So you kind of had to be careful and watch, your back and stuff. But that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I would have to say so.
And then the Olympics were due to come there shortly after I left, but I did get to go see the Olympic Stadium before I left. So
What did you think of your fellow officers and soldiers?
soldiers, well, the officers are respected because of their rank. I also respected my peers, but we all got along like, one big family, because that's what you do in the military, because you don't have your own personal family with you, so you become a family. And a lot of times the officers and the enlisted, would get together for various events, or just, to have, fun together. So.
How did you stay in touch with your family while you were serving?
Well, like I said at the beginning, we couldn't call home. First time I ever even left home when I was out in Colorado at the Air Force Academy. So that was very, very hard for me, and especially the fact that my roommate, her dad was a retired colonel, so she had been in the Air Force and had some idea how this worked, because I'd never been on an Air Force base before. And she didn't seem to miss her family at all, and I was so homesick. I was just going, how can that be? But it does teach you how important family is. And that, it's easy sometimes when you see it all the time that you don't miss it so much. And friends, I'll have to tell you, I know this sounds silly, but there are some things that hit you that you just think this is the greatest thing ever. And I'll tell the two of them, this is not about my family, but you ask if I remembered some of my instructors. When we had to do that 3-week thing out in the country, in the woods, it was hot, in the days it'd be hot, and nights it'd be cold, you're sleeping in a cot, sometimes you're sleeping out in a camp on the ground. But I'll never forget this upperclassman who was in charge of our group of 20 or something on a Saturday afternoon. We'd been running hot, sweaty, stinky, and he brought us ice creams. Like, that was the greatest thing in the world.
What were your thoughts on the food that you were served while in the...
Oh, well, speaking of food. Well, of course, it's institutional food. And I will say, of course, Air Force Academy had way better food than everywhere else. Other places, not so good. But I usually because I was an officer, I lived in an apartment and cooked for myself. But at the Air Force Academy, being from South Carolina, I told you there's this table of 10 people, and when you're a freshman, you get yelled at. You literally have to eat those square meals, and you can't look up, and you can only look at that little seal on your plate, and it is really crazy. And if somebody asks you a question, you have to put everything down, and you have to turn to them, and you have to be able to chew and swallow within 3 swallows, and you go, yes, sir, and they ask you a question. So they have a form they fill out after every meal, and the standard answers were, I don't even know what the questions were, but the answers were fast, neat, average, friendly, good, good. And you just fill that out no matter what. So this upperclassman, who did have kind of a sense of humor, you weren't supposed to laugh, and it was kind of hard for me. But he said, Ballard. I said, yes, sir. He goes, because I was filling out the form, that was my turn. He said, is there anything you think any comments you would like to make on the form, whatever? I said, yes, sir. And he goes, what's that? I said, sir, I think we should have okra more often. He said, okra? What is an okra? So then I go into this long thing about how you can chop it up and fry it, or you can stew it with tomatoes, or some people like my mama did, we just boiled it and sucked the whole thing down. It was pretty hysterical.
Did you feel pressure or stress?
Oh my gosh.
Only.
So when I went to pilot training, like I said, I had hardly ever flown. And then I'm in a class of all guys, so I have nobody to talk to. It's just me. And so I managed to determine that the success of women pilots in the Air Force was totally determined on my success. So I start off and you go through these first basic flights and you just take off and you go out and you fly around in the area and, do basic little maneuvers you get to do. It's really very cool. You do chandelles where you're flying along, then you turn around and go the other way, and then you do loops, and then you do rolls, and you do crazy eights, and so you do really cool stuff. And eventually, after, I don't remember exactly, like 30 hours, 20 hours, the instructor gets out and you get to go fly by yourself. Well, as we got closer and closer to that point, I got more and more anxious. And I think typically I'm not an anxious person, but it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so finally, I go to, because you can't stay forever. If you keep failing, they're going to boot you out. So you go to, your next to last ride is called an 88 ride. I have no idea why, but you call it 88. So I fly with this major, and we get down, and he goes, "You're the most nervous person I've ever flown with in my life." Now, I've been studying, and I've been trying, and they do something called chair flying where you think of the entire flight and what you're going to do it every single second of that whole flight. Oh, this is not good. I get one more flight, and I'm out of here. So I'm a person of faith, and so I said, okay, God, this is it. If you want me to be here, it's in your hands. We'll see how it goes. So I didn't study that night. I didn't worry that night. I got a good night's sleep. I went up, and of course I had to fly with the colonel because this is the last flight, and he goes, "That is the most perfect flight I've ever been on in my life." So I've always used that over the years for many, many, many men who told me that I shouldn't be flying, and I always thought, well, you know what? Somebody doesn't agree with you. I never said that, but that's what I always thought.
Were there any entertainers that came to perform for?
Trying to think of when I was at the Air Force Academy, Sammy Davis Jr. and there was a black Colonel General James, and I think he was one of the first African American generals in the Air Force. And they did a show together. It was hysterical. It was wonderful. It was really great. So.
And what did you do when you were on leave, when you had some time?
Let's see. When the cool thing about that job, I wasn't very fond of flying the T-37. When I flew the KC-135, the air refueling plane, we were with the B-52, so they had the nuclear bombs. Since we hardly ever flew, we got to fly that same T-37 for fun. Co-pilots did. So my other two girlfriends that were there, we were we were all there together, and we could fly this T-37. That was a two-person flight. So when I got to go flying with them, because we could go anywhere in the country, which was great fun. So I was flying with them, a lot of fun. I'll never forget flying over through Phoenix, Albuquerque. We were talking to Albuquerque Center, I think. And so my friend talked on the radio, and then I talked on the radio, and the controller goes, "Oh my gosh," he said, "are there two women in that airplane?" Surprise.
When you were in active duty, how did you go about staying in touch with your family?
While on active duty, when I started, there weren't cell phones or the internet or even email really. So it was just all about calling mama. I had made the phone calls back home. And then it got easier. When I was deployed, we had the luxury of having email. You would still have to stand and wait in line for the phone. But I was always in contact, very close relationship with my parents. So I stayed in touch as much as I could. In boot camp, it was all about letters, and it still is, because recruits still can't use the phone. So it's important to maintain those connections. I only got to come back when I was on the West Coast. I only got to come home maybe once or twice a year. So those phone calls were very important. I don't think you can be in the military and not have stress. It's really what we thrive on. It's what you're trained to deal with in boot camp. That's part of the reason you're getting yelled at and you're just constantly being stressed out. We use that phrase, stressed out, in boot camp. It's just part of life, but it also helps you. It equips you to deal with all those life stressors. We move every couple of years, and that's when you talk to some people in the psychology field, that's a stressor in itself, especially the Marines with families. Everyone's picking up and moving every couple of years, deployments, separation. It's just part of life. But we also recognize that when we joined. So was it stressful? Yes. Was I equipped to handle it? Absolutely.
What did Marines do on their off time to entertain themselves?
Marines are very entertaining. They're very creative. As I got later in my career, we learned a phrase: never say never when it comes to a Marine doing something, because they've probably done it. But for the most part, I personally just hung out at home. I liked my downtime at home. Later in my career, I had a dog, so it was just me and my dog going out on walks. But Marines were known for shenanigans in the barracks, or going out in town and having fun. But yeah, I was a little bit more low key. There was always the after a mess night, someone would find some dish soap and some water and maybe lather up the hallways, and the Marines would find themselves sliding down the hallways on their bellies, pretending to land on an aircraft carrier. So it was just, that was the kind of good fun, hopefully some wore helmets because there could be some injuries. But I also joked, it sounds silly, but Marines playing basketball, it always turned into combat basketball. It would almost get to the point where if you were getting ready for a deployment, you had to put a stop to that. As an officer, I had to be very responsible. So I don't have as many good stories as the junior enlisted Marines do, but we'd almost have to put a stop to that because inevitably someone was going to get injured and it would mess up the deployment roster. I actually served a tour in our Marine Corps Motion Picture TV Liaison Office. So in that role, I actually worked with celebrities on a constant basis, whether it was on their sets working on the films or TV shows that they were working on. But as part of that, especially after 9/11, they were really reaching out to us. Agents were reaching out, trying to say thank you to the troops. So we arranged, groups of celebrities to meet Marines on ships or back at the base, primarily on the West Coast, Camp Pendleton, or the air station down in Miramar. So I was never the one just in the crowd enjoying it, but it was my pleasure to be behind the scenes trying to make some of that USO type stuff happen.
Okay. What was your impression of your fellow officers or fellow Marines over the course of your time with the Corps?
The Marines I served with are the people that I can depend on to this day. If I call up my fellow Marines, whether it's some of my best friends that I went to boot camp or OCS with, or the people that I served with till the very end. And in fact, that's one of the hardest things after leaving is you just aren't surrounded by that caliber of people everywhere you go. So I miss them, but they're just the people that you can depend on for anything.
What ways did you use to stay in touch with family? Obviously, your husband, but also maybe family back home.
Sure. Staying in touch with the family this day and age was very easy for us because we had telephones, we had computers, we could send emails. Got to the point where we had cell phones. So staying in touch was very easy. So definitely predominantly by telephone, I would say. We weren't big letter writers, although I would say probably some of our times overseas, we did a little more letter writing. But predominantly just the phone calls. And of course, as things kicked up with technology, we were able to send photos of the kids and, things like that to stay in touch, and pictures of what we were doing and where we were. So that was really great. But we did, family is very important to us. So no matter where we were, if we were stateside, we made it a point to go home. So I know a lot of folks don't do that, but if it was a 14-hour drive to get there for Christmas, that's what we did, to be able to be with our extended family.
Were there ever any outside entertainment brought in for the folks in your unit or anything?
Yes, we definitely had opportunities where majority I would say were concerts. They would bring in musical performances and things for well-known artists that we could see that was specifically just for the base personnel and their families, things like that. Presidential visits as well, where that was open up to folks from the base to be able to go out. So I actually shook the president's hand one time And then I was in the presence of one other, and didn't get close enough to shake his hand though. But so things like that were fun. So leave, and so I would say mostly the family time was mostly holidays.
Okay.
And then, but the reality is, I feel like it was not just because we were in the military, but just coordinating any kind of vacations with our families was just somewhat difficult. Trying to get everybody's schedules coordinated. Because of course for us, like anybody, you only have a certain amount of vacation time. Some people, like civilian sectors, you have to plan that vacation out a year in advance. I want this week, this week, this week. Luckily, we didn't have to do that with the military. We just had our time and we could use it when we wanted. And so I would say, honestly, really majority family time was spent with the holidays, but then for us, it was just taking trips, doing the fun things that we wanted to do. And if family were able to join us, that was great.
Any particularly humorous or unusual events that come to mind during your time in the service?
This is, you say that, and the first thing that comes to mind, it doesn't have anything to do with my service, but just where we were at the time when we were in South Korea. That was probably the most interesting and most eye-opening cultural experience for us. They're very much a walking community, and they have a lot of markets. And when the markets are fresh food markets. So fresh meaning like literally just pulled the fish out of the water, kind of fresh. But one of the things that was most interesting, I felt, was and humorous, was they ate bugs in South Korea, and I just couldn't get over it. So I'm walking through this market because again, just on certain days, that's what you do. You go to the market for your fresh food, vegetables, but they were literally like dead beetles and other creatures like that, and they were like a delicacy. Like these people, like we would buy, let's say, a bag of peanuts and walk around eating it. They would buy a bag of these insects that are like dried, and they would eat them like they were eating a chocolate-covered almond. And it's literally this, I don't even know what it was, but it was very interesting. So yes, that's something we always will remember and joke about. Like, yeah, to each their own. Go Korea.
What was your overall impression of your fellow officers or your fellow airmen?
Overall, I thought everybody was great. Of course, just like in the civilian sector, it's a diverse community. That's the thing about the military, is that you're getting people from all over. So all different backgrounds, shapes, sizes, colors, and that's what I love about the military, is that diversity aspect. But it really makes it fun because you get to learn a lot of new things, be introduced to different things, and so I feel that again, we're just a makeup of society, and so you've got your good eggs and you've got your bad eggs, and that's on the officer side and on the enlisted side. So there's no like, better, enlisted's better or officers are better. We're all just people. We just happen to sign up into the military in a different fashion. And that's how you get your officer and enlisted sides. But again, overall, great people. But like I said, of course, you have those one or two that you remember and you're like,
What were the primary means that you stayed in touch with your family while you were in the Navy or on board?
Primary means while I was on board the ship and while we were on deployment was email and Facebook Messenger. We did have some computers in our educational area that we could email with. And then occasionally I would be able to call them. There are payphones on the ship, so there's usually a long line. There's not many. So I didn't get to speak to them frequently, but when I did, it was very special.
Did you find that you normally had plenty of supplies, necessary things while you were deployed?
I found that we did usually have the supplies we needed, but the difficulty of it was they were always in storerooms, and storerooms on a ship can be they usually are at the very bottom of the ship and very far away from where you need the things. So in my job, we often needed chemicals for the water chemistry, and we would have to go all the way to the other end of the ship and lug an 80-pound bottle of hydrogen to our space. So they were accessible, but difficult to get.
Okay. While you were on active service, did you feel pressure or stress?
I definitely felt some stress while I was on active duty. My job was very intense, very, very long days, and a lot of schoolwork. It's said that for the nuclear machinist mate or any of the nuclear rates, that we do about a 4-year bachelor's degree in 6 months. And so it's constant school, constant learning and bettering yourself and reading almost illegible textbooks. So there's a lot of stress that comes from that. And then on deployment, there's the stress of being away from my family. For me, when I first got to my ship, when I was first stationed there, they had already started the deployment. So I got flown from the US to Kuwait and from Kuwait onto the ship. So there was the stress of a very new environment, learning all that, while also trying to get in the groove with my job.
What did folks do on board ship for entertainment? What did they do to entertain themselves?
So our aircraft carrier had 9 gyms on it, and some of them were very small, like the size of a closet, but it was still really nice to have that space to go work out. So a lot of people spent their free time working out, playing on like DS's and different small video games type of things. We actually had a space that had a TV and a PS4 set up, or we would just hang out and talk and listen to music and just get to know each other better.
Were there ever instances where entertainers arrived to put on any kind of shows or?
We did. For New Year's, we were on deployment through Christmas and New Year's. They had a small band come out and play some country music for us in the hangar bay. They turned all the lights off and put on red lights in the hangar bay, and it was a really good experience where we all got to just kind of decompress for a little while we were out at sea.
Nice. Private concert.
It really was. It was wonderful.
If you went on leave, and I would assume that would be shore leave, what kinds of things did you do while you were free to do that?
So every time I took leave, I went home to see my family. I'm the youngest of 6 kids and have many nephews and nieces. So I would always go home to see my family and enjoy that time with them. Again, decompress and just get away from the job for a little while.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events while you were in the service
Yeah.
that you can share?
Towards the end of deployment, we were getting very bored. We'd been out at sea a very long time, and we were just ready to come home. And so we would find ways to entertain ourselves. And one of the ways, there's a couple good stories with this, but one of them was I was in the engine room, and I was walking into a different portion of the engine room, kind of through an open doorway, and a boot goes flying past my face. And I look, and there's 2 people, one with one of the like industrial sized trash cans, and the other one has his boots unlaced and like loosened up, and he's kicking them, trying to score baskets by kicking his boots into the industrial sized trash can. So that's one of my favorite memories. That was really good. And then later on, again, out of sheer boredom, we had cardboard boxes, and a friend of mine made a full suit of armor out of cardboard boxes.
Were there pranksters that would pull pranks or?
Yeah, I would say there were pranksters. It was almost more of a rivalry, between the divisions. So in the nuclear field in the Navy, there are 3 main rates. There's machinist mates, electrician mates, and electronics technicians. And so there's a lot of rivalry and prank playing between the rates, just because it's a friendly competition of like, no, we're better, and so there was a lot of stuff like that.
Okay.